Another example, a library in Seattle. If you look at it like this, as an iconic architectural piece, it can be judged as huge and very shouting for attention. But then if you look at what it really is, and you put it in its context and its downtown context of Seattle, it's not the first thing you see. There is the building. Another example, again a theater, a concert hall, one of the program elements here in West Kowloon as well. If you look at it as a piece of architecture and as a challenge in itself to build a concert hall, it can be very iconic. But if you put it in its context, you see that it is part of a full urban development and that it is one building in a full circle that is very central in the city, but that it is not one of its kind. Also, projects that are still in design can be put more in its context. It's not only about the image. If you see a project like this, one of the largest theaters in Asia, a theater going to be built in Taipei, with 3 large auditorium, but also with a super theater where more than 3,000 people can look at the same show at the same time. It looks very iconic, but it was completely designed based on the fact that the site where it should be is the most vibrant night market of the whole of Taipei, and a very interesting place where everybody eats his stinky tofu, buys his cheap clothes. And do you want to take that away for building a theater that should be iconic? I think you shouldn't. And therefore we designed the building above the night market. So you can still eat your stinky tofu, you can still buy your cheap clothes, and at the same time that part of culture becomes part of the culture that is called theater and performance. Because from the night market you just accidentally can walk into the theater and experience what happens inside a building like that. And if you then project both on top of each other, you have a building that is on top of a night market. In its context, completely different than the first image that I showed you. Another good example, we were asked to design a new headquarters for one of the biggest Korean telecom companies, and they wanted to have a branding image. They wanted to have an image that looks very well and has a kind of first wow effect. That's always a very difficult question to an architect, and we can debate a long time if this gives a wow effect or not, but it at least looks like a W, so maybe it has a wow effect. But if you then put it in its context, you see maybe why that W started to exist, or why we think it has a wow effect, because we tried to direct all the towers of that program towards interesting places in the city and give it therefore a reaction to its context. And then when you put it in the context, it might not look so wow, but at least when you're inside the building, you will experience the city up to a maximum. So, let's say if you look at architecture in its urban context, maybe there is a city versus architecture or architecture versus city. And what can you then say that are the challenges that are ahead? That was a question that we were asked to answer. If I knew that, I probably won every competition in the world, and I probably could also predict when, let's say, we win this competition. But let's not go there. I'm not able to predict any future. But what I could say is that one of the challenges that we see and saw happening, but probably will happen again, is how do you do urban planning without any context, or architecture without a context. Here you see our team standing literally on the beach, or at least that is what you think, but it is actually the desert in the Middle East. And we were asked to build a city of a square kilometer at this spot. Where do you start? That is a kind of a question that I don't dare to answer, but we had to answer it. So we made this out of that desert. And you can think why, but we were asked to design a square kilometer, so we designed a square of a kilometer by a kilometer and put buildings in it. That's probably a challenge. What happens to city and architecture if there is no context? Challenge number one. Then challenge number two is what happens if the context goes faster than the urban development or the architecture? What happens here a lot in this region? There is a decision made by a government, we're going to develop a city, and at that point there's a village of maybe 3,000 people, and it grows within 10 years to a city of 13 million people, which happened often in the Pearl River Delta and in China over the last 20 years. And the first thing that happened was infrastructure, context, and you don't see any site of architecture of houses or businesses or whatsoever. They had to respond to what was already there and simply connect to it. And that will happen again and again because, as I told you in the beginning, 90% of the world is undeveloped and will face the same challenges that China faced already over the last 20 years. Let's say Africa, India, and I can go on and on and on. And then this can happen as well. At first sight, just a view of the city of Shenzhen, giving context to the infrastructure, but at the same time you can maybe see here the rice fields, which are extremely close to the most central point of Shenzhen, which is a challenge. How do you position these things next to each other? So challenge number two is speed. Challenge number three, for cities that already exist and develop further, like Hong Kong, is how do you preserve the context that's already there? How do you enhance it? How do you make it more exciting? But don't erase it. A lot of qualities are there. Especially in Hong Kong, we did a lot of research for the West Kowloon Cultural District design, and we found extremely amount of qualities, and not only in the urban development, not only in the architecture, but also in the people, in the culture, in the performance, in the art world, and so on. How to preserve that? Buildings like this should never go away. So please put them on a graded list on the highest end and never touch them. Yeah? Context like this should also never disappear. And as you see, there is no building here. Yeah? So it's also our responsibility as urban planners to not only look at buildings and design buildings, but also keep context and understand that context and make it happen again. And let's talk about nature. Also very important in the context. And this is unique for Hong Kong. Unique in a lot of places in the world when there is a little piece of green. And let's try to enhance that, but also preserve it. Don't build another building here, another skyscraper. You have enough of that. So, what does this mean for West Kowloon? And now you think maybe he's anyway going to say something about the project, but no, really not. That's something that will be next time. The only thing I can say is that there will be a context, and even maybe larger than you think. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gianotten.